So, on The View the other day, Whoopi Goldberg said the Holocaust was not about race. What? Did Whoopi Goldberg grow up in another world? It's Rob Nelson Live.
Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what you're talking
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says your headings. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. You got a good point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it.
All right, everybody. Hey, welcome to the show. Been a minute. We're back. We took a couple weeks off. Happy to be here. Let's dive right into it, everybody. Watching on whatever platforms you're on. I know we go away for a while. Sometimes you go away too. So hopefully you're coming back. And as always, want all your comments and feedback and engagement as we talk through. Today we're gonna focus on just a simple topic today. Race. Race, cancel culture. Nothing big. Whoopi Goldberg. Okay, you got Whoopi lovers, Whoopi haters, whatever. Whoopi Goldberg is like an American institution. I mean, she has been, I remember her like back in my childhood, right? I mean, as an actress, as an activist, then The View. Yeah, I kind of like her earlier more than later. I don't know. She's got a little cranky. I think all the people on The View are kind of cranky. Like, it's like, whatever. Not my kind of show, but I'm not their demographic. But she's on The View, and they're talking about book banning. So they start out with kind of what's a conservative angle, an anti-conservative angle, because there's a whole thing. It's kind of interesting how cancel culture works. Although people on the right have been being canceled by people on the left for saying all kinds of things, people on the left focus a lot when people on the right try to cancel things. Fair enough. I mean, both sides focus when the other side tries to cancel. And so the left's recent thing is people on the right canceling books. I am not a fan of canceling books. I don't care what those books are. I don't care how bad they are. But, remember, people were taking like Mark Twain out of schools. That was people on the left because it was racist. And it's sort of like, okay, Mark Twain, was a satirist. He wasn't racist. And yes, the book says things that could be interpreted as racist if you don't see the satire. But Mark Twain's whole point wasn't to be a racist. It was to satirize racism, satirize all kinds of things. But remember, people on the left were taking books, pictures, there was that, there was Mark Twain. There were like a whole string of books and stories that were starting to get taken out of like kids' reading lists. And now the right has started to do it. So The View was talking about how a conservative school district had taken the book Mouse out of off its shelves, arguing that there was a picture of like a pornographic picture. It was like a picture of a nude person. Hey, we got to redefine pornography, okay? Like a picture of a nude person, not really porno, maybe 80 years ago, And then there was some other excuse they gave for why they were taking it out. And Mouse is a book about it's a book about racism, and it's a powerful kind of book about it. And we're not going to delve into the book, but it's MAUS, by the way, not MOOSE. Or MOUSE, I can't spell. And it's a story, and it's a story that should be told. So they were being critical of this book being taken down because it is an anti-racist book, and the reason the conservative district took it down had nothing to do with the racism message, although that was the implication. They didn't want the anti-racism message in there. Was this stupid nude picture and profanity or something else? I don't even remember. The details of why things get canceled become irrelevant to me because it's like everybody just finds a reason to cancel something and they hang their hat on whatever it is. And it's almost like pick your poison, as we will see, because it starts poisoning everybody. It's like peeing in one side of a pool. You can't pee in one end of the pool and be okay in the other end. It's like you pee in the pool, the whole pool gets peed in. And that's the problem that's happening with cancel culture. So Whoopi Goldberg makes a comment. They're talking about the book and the Holocaust connected to it. And Whoopi Goldberg says this. We have a clip of her saying this from The View.
Well, also, if you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about
maybe
race.
ethnicity.
Well, they
No,
consider
it's
Jews
about
a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about
Well,
race.
what is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy. It's
Well,
about
but
going
it's not-
after
it's
Jews
not about
and
ideal race.
gypsies
It's,
and
but these are two
Romas.
white groups of people.
Well, that-
Whoa, two white groups of people. Okay, again, context. She's referring, this again was a discussion about Maus. The just so if you want to know, Maus is the Art Spiegelman kind of graphic novel, and it's about him interviewing his father, who's a Polish Holocaust survivor. With us, the conversation about the Holocaust. Good to see you, Seriously Doubtful. And Whoopi Goldberg makes those comments. Yes, M-A-U-S. Thank you for the spelling. Seriously Doubtful. Great graphic novel. You should read it no matter what age you are. But again, very not anti-Semitic, very, explaining the horrors of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And Whoopi Goldberg says the Holocaust isn't about race. So here's where we're going to dive in. First with what she said. The Holocaust isn't about race. And FYI, Whoopi Goldberg got, blowing up, well, first challenged by her co-host, even Joy Behar. Didn't challenge her very hard, given that Joy Behar is Jewish. But Anna Navarra was like, "Are you serious?" It gets all garbled at the end, but she's like, "It's about white supremacists. It's about a white supremacist trying to wipe out another race." But here's the thing: you gotta decide what you believe here on the substance. Whoopi Goldberg didn't know the Holocaust was about race. I mean, is there a more obvious modern example of that has been hyper publicized for 80 years? Than the Holocaust? I mean, it's all about race. That's all the Holocaust was about. I mean, which planet did Whoopi Goldberg grow up on not to know that the Holocaust was about race? Hitler was a racist. Hitler wanted to wipe out the Jews. Hitler wanted to get rid of the inferior race, as he saw it, of the Jews and create a white supremacy race. I mean, everybody knows that. I don't know. You have to live under 20,000 rocks not to know that, right? I mean, that the Holocaust wasn't about race. I mean, even in our public discourse, everybody's always like, he's a Nazi, they're Nazis, they're Nazis. Everybody throws the Nazi thing around and everybody flips their arms up. How dare you compare it to the Nazis? You can't compare anything to the Nazis. Well, the Nazis weren't just bad people. The Nazis were the epitome of a state-driven racism to exterminate, to eliminate, genocide. How many times has Whoopi Goldberg talked about genocide, even slavery being, American slavery being genocide? She missed the boat. That one of the most famous genocides in modern history was Hitler's genocide of the Jews. 6 million people died. 6 million Jews died. More than that when you count in gypsies, Catholics, whatever, but 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust because Hitler wanted to wipe out the Jewish race. But Whoopi Goldberg says it wasn't about race. Who fucking cares what Whoopi thinks says? I'll tell you why it matters what Whoopi thinks and says. Fair point. I mean, because the larger point, which I'm going to get to, is not what Whoopi says, but how we respond to it and the idea of what's happening as we're canceling thought and culture. But it does matter what somebody on television says. It matters for the same reason it matters what anybody says. But I'm going to hold that thought. Who cares what Whoopi says? Because that logic is going to apply to who cares what anybody says. So let's just hold that. We're going to come back to that crap. We're going to put that back up in a minute. So I'm going to finish with what Whoopi said, because I care what Whoopi said, because Whoopi says all kinds of things all the time, and millions of people listen to it. And narratives are formed. And it bothers me that Whoopi, not that she said it wasn't about race. She knows she's not I don't think Whoopi Goldberg is anti-Semitic. And people who know her have said she's not. I'm not saying she is for a second. But why did she say that? And why does it matter? Because what Whoopi Goldberg did was essentially all lives matter. Deborah Messing kind of made that point. Basically, it's like when people were like, Black Lives Matter, no, all lives matter. That's basically what Whoopi Goldberg did. All lives matter. No, this wasn't about race. This was just about man's inhumanity to man. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't just about man's inhumanity to man. No one should ever forget what Hitler did in Nazi Germany. No one should ever forget. It is a lesson we could learn over and over and over again. Not just about man's inhumanity to man. There's a gazillion examples of that, about state-controlled, a state-driven genocide to wipe out another race and mobilizing your entire nation to turn on that race, to get your neighbors to hate you for being that race, and to literally, in an alternate universe, not that far off, Hitler could have won the war. Hitler could have won World War II, and he would have wiped out everybody who didn't fit in his perfect white race. So it does matter what you think about the Holocaust, and it matters what people say. But it bothers me because Whoopi Goldberg made the point, it's about white people on white people, two groups of white people. And that to her, she said later on Stephen Colbert, race is something I see. And think about that for a second, because this is part of the narrative that we're seeing going on. Race is something you see. No, it's not. If race is something you see, then a person's skin color alone determines their race. So if you're super light-skinned, if you're a super light-skinned black person, you're not black. It's not racism. Well, it's got a lot to do with literally how dark your skin is. And in fact, skin, casting by skin, whether in India or even in the black community, lighter or darker, is part of racism. I'm not saying you don't see it, but the notion that race is simply defined by something you see. So Jews aren't another race because they're kind of white like white people. Well, so are light-skinned Latinos. Are they not another race? She basically gave away her fundamental premise and prism through which she looks at the world, and many others do too. Race is about white and black people. Race is about black people and white people. And that's the problem. It's a narrative. It's a dangerously narrow narrative about what race really is, and about what racism really is, and about whether we really want to fight racism or whether we're literally just looking to move a political agenda. Let me show you what Whoopi Goldberg said by way of an apology. Can we put that tweet up, Crafty? On today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race. I should have said it is about both. As Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League shared, the Holocaust was about Nazis' systematic annihilation of the Jewish people who they deemed to be an inferior race. I stand corrected. The Jewish people have my support, always have. I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused. Okay, so here's my problem, right? What she said is, thanks, Crafty, she acts like she didn't know that. She comes on and says, I've learned from it. And here's my whole problem with the canceling thing. Moving on from exactly what she said. Whoopi Goldberg makes the statement. She gets suspended, a slap on the wrist for 2 weeks from ABC because they had no choice. And she says, gee, I need to learn to I hope I can think differently. That's what she said. I hope in the future I can think differently. And I'm sorry for what I said. I shouldn't have. I've now learned in talking to the Anti-Defamation League what the real story is. Okay, I don't for one friggin' second believe Whoopi Goldberg didn't know about the Holocaust was about race. I don't know how she could possibly not know that. I don't know what world she could live in. As a person who's an advocate, a big advocate against racism, particularly against black people, how she could not know that the Holocaust was about race. Did she literally just find out that Hitler, the reason people hate Hitler so much is because of what he did to the Jews? Not just because he was an evil man. There's a whole lot of evil men. No, she knew. And she didn't want to go there because in her mind, it's two groups of white people. And that's the danger of the racism scenario we're in. Racism is white people against everybody else, and it's not. Racism is anybody of any race, like putting down or boxing another race in for that. I know plenty of black people who are more racist than plenty of white people I know. A distrust, a dislike of people who just happen to be white. Racism is an ugly, pernicious disease that spreads through us, and we don't conquer it. We don't beat it by like looking out at it and picking and choosing which racism we want to narrate this week because it fits our agenda. We conquer it by opening ourselves up and realizing how much we need to actually come together and allow for more understanding. And that's the problem. The entire cancel culture debate we're in allows for no understanding. Gina Carano last year said this. Crafty, can you put her tweet up that got her kicked off The Mandalorian? Okay, sorry, that is not it, but that's okay. So that's her apology. I think I don't have her tweet that she actually said. But what she said was basically in the tweet, she said, if you remember, she tweeted that she thought thanks, Crafty. She thought the Nazis didn't start getting rid of the Jews just by themselves with soldiers. They first turned the Jewish people on the German people on the Jews in their own neighborhoods, convinced them to go after the Jews who were their neighbors, their friends, their colleagues, their associates, and to go after them and then create that kind of mass hysteria. And her comparison was, that's what we do when we start isolating people out politically and sort of cutting them down and dehumanizing them. Now, I think that's a stretch to suggest that our current political climate is the same as what was happening in Nazi Germany. But her point wasn't anti-Semitic. It was, this is what Hitler did. He first turned the people on their neighbors. For that, Gina Carano got canceled from The Mandalorian. For Whoopi Goldberg saying the Holocaust has nothing to do with race, she got a 2-week token suspension. The double standard in how we apply who gets canceled and why is a problem. But bigger than that, the problem is that we cancel people at all, right? The big mistake we're making is that we cancel people, period. If you want to solve the problem, if you want to have a way to open people's eyes, you don't remove them when they say something you don't like, you engage them. Gina Carano, to me, wasn't guilty of anti-Semitism at all. She was guilty of overreach, perhaps, suggesting that's what we're doing here, but hardly anti-Semitism and hardly worth being canceled. And Whoopi Goldberg was guilty of anti-Semitism, no matter what she says, but she did it not because she doesn't like Jews. She did it because she really has a problem seeing racism outside the lines of white and black. So Jews are kind of white, and white people, that can't be racism. Let's just call it bad inhumanity to man. Both deserve a conversation, as do far many other things that people say that are offensive or provocative or misinformation, which takes me to what happened with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan had Dr. Robert Malone, who we had on as a guest, by the way, if you recall. Joe Rogan got a few more views than we did. We did good, but Joe Rogan's podcast with Dr. Robert Malone is the #1 podcast in the world. And for that, there was a backlash. And that backlash led to Neil Young and then Joni Mitchell and then Bruce Springsteen's guitarist and a handful of other 100-year-old musicians saying, we're taking our music off Spotify. It's us or Joe Rogan, which, by the way, on the face of it, really, was that ever going to be an issue? $100 million to Joe Rogan. Spotify's moved from music to podcast as their sort of core for revenue. I don't think they're going to keep a bunch of 80-year-old rockers on for the minimum income that brings for their music and get rid of Joe Rogan. But I don't know that they ever thought they would. They were making a point, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell. Remember, there used to be these big counterculture people who wanted to stand up against the man, against the system. Well, suddenly, when Joe Rogan allows someone to come on and say something that they think is part of the narrative of misinformation around COVID, Joe Rogan needs to be silenced. Joe Rogan needs to acknowledge misinformation. We need to silence the misinformation. Well, first of all, I know Robert Malone. Robert Malone's not spewing misinformation. I talked to Robert Malone the night before he went on Rogan. Robert Malone said on Rogan, I may or may not be right about everything I say. But by the way, I am, whether you think I did A, B, C, or D, because people have said he didn't actually create the technology himself, he didn't create this, he didn't that. You cannot argue that Robert Malone was not one of the key architects of the mRNA technology upon which 2 of the major vaccines we take are based. For him to have an opinion is valid. And he said, maybe I'm wrong. But to silence my opinion because Twitter had censored him 2 days before, had deplatformed him. To say he doesn't get a voice, to say our answer is to simply silence people when we see over and over and over again that what was once misinformation now becomes true, what was once considered wrong suddenly is not wrong, whether that's in science, whether that's having to do with COVID, we're seeing many new discoveries that change what we thought was true, or whether it has to do with political views. The idea that we tell you can't talk, you can't say it, that we label anything misinformation. I mean, I read news feeds now and they literally spew it out. Joe Rogan had Robert Malone on who said misinformation about the vaccines and COVID. According to who? According to one group of people. I think Dr. Fauci says all kinds of misinformation. I think we're going to find down the road all kinds of people said things that weren't true. And I actually think Dr. Malone is saying a whole lot of things that are true. and saying things that he believes are true based on science. So let's have the conversation based on science. But no, we're not willing to have the conversation. And you know what? Whoopi Goldberg said something that she thought was true. Not because she doesn't like Jews, because she's got a framework around racism that I think isn't quite right. And we should have the conversation on that, as we should with Gina Carano. But no, our response is let's silence you. Let's cancel you. Let's literally take you off the air. And the hypocrisy just winds up. I mean, Neil Young, remember Neil Young? Neil Young was all big on the whole GMO thing and how, the whole conspiracy of GMOs, right? Well, okay, it was like the anti-vaccine thing. It was literally the same thing, and he was all big on it. I mean, now he's suddenly, this is misinformation. I don't know. It's not misinformation or pro-information. It's information. It may be right. It may be wrong. We have a conversation. We have a dialogue to find out how. But our reflexive need to cancel those who don't agree with us on both sides, to silence, to eliminate. You know what? I think everybody should get to say what they want. And if you don't like what they're saying, yeah, change the channel. Go to a different platform. Go watch somebody else. But let people talk and come on and have the debate, have the dialogue, because what we're doing instead is just creating this dangerous trickle-down narrative, which again plays out to Jeff Zucker today, resigning from CNN because he had, a relationship consensual with his longest term business partner, his chief marketing person. And, they'd been friends and colleagues for 20 years. And at some point along the way, they started hooking up. They say it happened during COVID. My guess is from things I've heard, it happened sooner than that, but it doesn't matter. Problem wasn't that he couldn't have the relationship. Problem was he didn't disclose it. Didn't disclose it when they were investigating around Chris Cuomo. So now he resigns. Chris Cuomo went down. Andrew Cuomo went down. One person after another keeps falling to these. Andrew Cuomo, by the way, the governor, should have fallen because what he did crossed the line. But Chris Cuomo, I don't know. Jeff Zucker, have a relationship, Gina Carano saying things, Whoopi Goldberg saying things. I mean, we literally are knocking people off because they don't fit, and no one's ever going to fit enough. No one's ever going to be perfect. No one's ever not going to make a mistake, say something wrong. We're just going to keep setting higher and higher bars and knocking people off. And, one side will knock the people off, then the other side, and then they'll go back and they'll try not to. It just becomes a complete circle jerk firing squad. Nobody wins. Who loses? Every one of us, because we don't really get good information. If you think listening to Robert Malone is seeding your brain with misinformation versus giving you a perspective you may not have thought about from a guy who literally at a minimum created the technology, architected the technology these vaccines are based on. So if he's wrong, he's certainly got a valid viewpoint. If you listen to him, you'd certainly go, that's interesting. If you think Dr. Anthony Fauci is always right, then how come he keeps changing his story? How come the lab leak theory that he covered up, and made go away seems more and more true? If you think Big Pharma doesn't have a financial incentive in what happens, I'm not saying whether the vaccines are good or bad. I'm saying if you don't think they have an incentive in getting that vaccine and as many people around the world as possible, a financial corporate incentive run by shareholders whose primary goal is profit, as that's the nature of capitalism. If you don't think that's an interest that weighs heavily in what they push for, you're crazy. So only by having open discussion, debate, dialogue, do we ever even have a shot at seeing through it. But instead we sit in our camps and we cancel and we cancel and we cancel. And we don't even cancel evenly. Whoopi Goldberg gets 2 weeks. Gina Carano gets booted. You actually, by that standard, Whoopi should have gotten booted. Gina got in 2 weeks. But neither one of them should have gotten booted. Should just open up for more conversation, for more dialogue. At what point will we decide canceling, labeling things as misinformation? That label should be taken away. It's like you went to court of law and one side says one thing, the other side says another, and the judge says, you can't say your side, it's misinformation. It's like, let the jury decide. We're the jury, we the people. We get to decide. But you have to have the most information, the most speech to decide. And the answer to bad speech, hateful speech, speech you think is misinformed, is counter speech. Louder, more powerful, more truthful. To me, it's that simple. That's my rant for today. Crafty, welcome to my wound up world, Crafty.
It was fun today, Rob. It was fun today. I like the analogy at the end about law.
Yeah, right.
To me, that was like a light bulb. I was like, oh yeah,
Well, because think about it. I thought about it. Like, you go into court of law and two sides have totally different views of what happened in every court case. He said this. No, she said this. No, this is what happened. That's not what happened. I wasn't even there. I can show you I was on a plane with blah, blah. And the judge doesn't go, hey, sorry, you don't get to say your side, Crafty, because I've decided it's misinformation. The jury goes, let us hear it all, and we'll decide who we think is telling the truth, who we think is lying, and then we'll make a decision. And I went to law school, right? Juries are deciders of fact. Judges just rule on law. They rule on the rules. They don't rule on the substance of the facts. If both sides get to put their facts out, the jury picks the facts they want to believe. And they never present the same facts. They always disagree. Occasionally they go, okay, I'll agree to your facts about that, but not about that. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're basically saying, no, we're going to decide which facts are you allowed to hear ahead of time. And everything else gets bandied about. And everyone does it. I mean, the left does it more than the right in some ways now, but it's both sides are guilty. It's like everyone's guilty of trying to silence opinions they don't like or mischaracterize them. The left definitely more than the right now. I don't know why the left didn't used to do that, but it's definitely the liberal, not the left, the mainstream liberal media primarily. The far left is actually not. The far left progressives are actually kind of anti, the silence and censoring.
And I think the problem we have is between the differences between the two systems on your analogy, right? Because the judge was the moderator and the judge heard both sides, right? But in society or social media, yeah, you may have two sides, but who acts as the moderator? The social media platform that is aligned with one of the lawyers, so to speak, in your analogy. So eventually
it's not a fair moderator.
Right.
Because the judge really is the arbiter of life.
That fair moderator for society and social media.
Yeah, and because the judge sets rules, but we set those rules, and we should let people actually operate openly on them. I don't know. This whole thing gets so complicated and deep, and to the point made earlier on, who cares what Whoopi Goldberg thinks? I mean, you could argue that in general, who cares what a celebrity says or thinks? And I'm not saying celebrities' opinions matter in the sense of like, we should give them an enormous amount of credence, but they matter in that they influence so many other people and high-profile people. Whether you could say, who cares what Aaron Rodgers thinks? Who cares what Joe Rogan thinks? Who cares what Whoopi Goldberg thinks? Who cares what President Biden thinks? I mean, Whoopi Goldberg is no different than Joe Biden. Joe Biden got elected president. Whoopi Goldberg has more fans and viewers and people who like her. She got elected to The View because people want to watch her. So I would argue, if you want to say who cares what any individual thinks to that comment that the Reddit user put up, that's fine. But to suggest that Whoopi, because she's a celebrity, is somehow, and she's a talk show host, so she's more than just an actor. She's actually somebody who spews an opinion to millions of people on a daily basis. Well, so does Joe Biden. I'd argue they're no different. If you care what Joe Biden thinks, you care what Whoopi Goldberg thinks. She has a bigger platform than he does, and it matters what they say and do. But that was the secondary point to the larger point of, it bothers me that we're censoring and canceling them all.
And my little addendum to add on to you is they also provide you from a different insight, different from yourself, right? If you're a white individual or Hispanic and you see someone who's on a major platform who's black, guess what? Their opinion gives you insight into their point of view as a black individual. I'm like, okay, I never thought of that. The other one is they're at a person of status, right? That shows you what Hollywood or celebrities might think also. A normal layperson or common person isn't going to know what that feels like or what the thought process
true.
is.
But again, I think that point that I am Big Mac is making is, who cares about that? Who cares what a celebrity thinks just because they're a celebrity? If you want to know what their life is like, sure. And Crafty, actually to your first point, the only thing I think though is it's a little dangerous that we sometimes do look at people and go, oh, that person's a black person. That, I get a black person's point of view. And I think that can be actually dangerous because, right, they become representative as if they speak for all people like them. And it's I'm just saying, the number of times I've heard black people say most of the commentators they see don't reflect them. I think it's sometimes dangerous that we assume, oh, that person speaks for all Latinos. That person speaks for all black people. That person speaks for all conservatives. That person speaks for, it's sort of like, no, it's just one voice. And you're right, though. They're representative of certainly if, a different life experience than I may have. But I do think we have to be careful not to give too much credit. But not too much, But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter what they say. That's my only point. My simplest point would be, if it doesn't matter what Whoopi Goldberg says, it doesn't matter what Joe Biden says, because they're the same. They both got elected in different ways. And actually, Whoopi Goldberg reaches more people than Joe Biden. And she does it. It's not democratic. We didn't literally vote, but if she sucked and nobody wanted to hear her, The View would take her off and replace her. It's actually almost as democratic as an election. That's my thoughts, Crafty. My thoughts. You look good back there, Crafty. I like the background. I like the look, the white sort of working man look. Let's wrap this and go to whatever we might have on Reddit.
Sure. Shelley, thank you very much for the applause.
Yes, thank you, Shelley. And for everyone for your comments. I know we've been a couple weeks, so we got to ramp back up.
Actually, we'll wrap this up with the last comment here. And I'm going to wrap that up with Shelley, who gave us a decent comment there.
What she said reflects a complete lack of study of historical facts, where descriptions of racial features were printed and propagated. It was ignorant and wrong. Yeah, you know, that's an interesting point, Shelley, 8888. You not only a lack of historical facts, but I was thinking about it. I was like, you know, to make the white on white comparison sort of ignores the fact that historically, whenever someone has used racism, they've almost always identified physical features. Jews were depicted negatively in caricatures for certain physical features that made them stand out. And even in Nazi Germany, if you looked Jewish, so looking Jewish wasn't like looking waspy. It was certain features. And you can say that about Hispanics, blacks, and certain white people, Asian people. So it isn't just about skin tone. That skin tone thing really bugged me, Shelley. It really bugged me that she made it like it's white on white. Like just because Jews are lighter. And by the way, not all Jews are. I mean, go to Israel. Not everybody's super light skinned. But the notion that, you know, that it's white people because Jews are somehow white people, right? A total ignorance of history. But I'm not sure how much Whoopi was ignorant of history and how much she just didn't want to go there because in her mind, it breaks her narrative. And I'm not saying she's anti-Semitic. It breaks her narrative about how to see race as a very black and white thing. But great comment. Thank you. Thanks, Crafty. Thank you guys all for watching. We'll see you next week.